Welcome to Aspen Leading Edge. I'm Patty Roberts from St. Mary's University School of Law. Today's guest is Rachel Anderson. She is Professor of Law at William S. Boyd School of Law at UNLV, and I'm so delighted to have you as a guest today, Professor Anderson.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
Well, I noticed that your areas of expertise include international business and good governance and corporate governance, and so I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your experience in getting to the academy in the first place. What did you do before you became a law professor?
Well, in fact, before I even went to law school, I was living and studying in Berlin, and I had the opportunity to work for a company that was a subsidiary of a German utility. And so I got to be involved in a lot of international economic activities through that work. And so that really developed an interest for me in the international. But it wasn't really until I was in law school and took some business classes and discovered that I just loved business law and that I really enjoyed the aspect of it that could be win-win, and that was something that I really enjoyed about this area of the law. And so between those two things, when I went to look for a job after law school, I was really looking for something that was international and business. And my hope was I would get only that work so I could always be happy. And so I ended up taking a job at Skadden London, where my job was international and business and just that all the time. But through that work, I had the opportunity to work with Doug Nordlinger, who was one of the best attorneys I have ever known, very highly regarded attorney, and he did very bespoke work. So I had an opportunity to work in a range of fields that I might not otherwise in the international business context because I was working in his team.
Well, that's outstanding. So you're in Skadden, London, and then how do you make it to being a law professor? What did that trajectory look like?
Oh my goodness, that is such a story. Well, I had a professor in law school, Angela Harris, who's responsible for many people considering going into the academy and then doing so. She had actually recommended that I consider that in law school because I had written 2 law review articles as a student that I had published.
That's a lot for a law student.
It is a lot. And so she recommended that, but that was new to me. And I was new to the idea of thinking about your next job when you were in a job. And so I was just only ready to go to my job in London. But she called me from her sabbatical and said, you should think about going into the academy. And I thought, well, I love my job. So isn't that the right time to be open to another job because you would only take something you really wanted?
That's a great perspective, instead of running from something that you didn't want to do, to find something you wanted to do even more. So you applied, and how did that go?
I applied, I had to use my vacation, I interviewed, I went to UNLV, and it felt at home right away. The people were just very down to earth. My mentor, Richard Buxbaum, had said that would be a place that would be a good fit for me. And I ended up going to UNLV, and as it happened, Doug Nordlinger and his wife, whose aunt lived in Arizona, they came out every year, and he taught international business with me every year until I got tenure. And that allowed me to have live, real international issues as part of our course content going along. And that was something that stayed with me. Even then, after he passed and was no longer coming out, that became something that was really important to me, to have that current international, what's really going on in business right now component of the class.
What a gift that was to you as a new teacher, but also to your students. My goodness, to have those kinds of contemporary issues right out of the law firm. And good of him to do. And you said, so you try to keep that kind of contemporary issue discussion alive in your classes still. So how do you do that?
Well, that's one of the things about the textbook that I had the opportunity to prepare that I wouldn't normally, in just one year. But if you're thinking about a textbook, you want to put everything in it you love to teach with. So one of the things that I did for the textbook was I included publications from the Global Legal Monitor, which is published by the U.S. Library of Congress. And those are updates on what is happening in international business around the world. And so I include excerpts of that so that both the faculty can point to it and allow students, for example, to follow and see what happened after this event, how has that law changed. It allows the students to do comparative work, to know what laws recently were changed in different countries and compare them. It allows them to think about things that we don't do in the U.S., but that are occurring in other governance structures in other jurisdictions around the world. So that's one of the ways that I included that. That piece was very important to me. It was so important to me, in fact, that each chapter has an issues and examples section where it could be cases, it could be other documents, but there's then a global development section. And that's where all of that information about what has been developing over the years internationally in business is located in each chapter, so that it's easy to find in that chapter, but also is expandable. And it's exciting to have an English language version, right, to give you access to what's happening in other countries.
I love it. You have pushed us right into the deep end because you've gone right into the textbook, International, Transnational, and Comparative Business Transactions. This is a first edition just published this fall through Aspen, and it sounds very exciting. And actually, I can sense your enthusiasm about the book and the material. So what prompted you initially to think there should be a different book, another book that addresses some of these comparative business issues for students?
Well, you know how Aspen representatives come around and talk to you about the different books. And so the Aspen representative that had come to me, I had said, well, actually, because I had all of these exercises developed, in part when I was working with Doug, but also other ones that I had developed over time that were interactive simulations or otherwise of actual transactions. And so I started talking about it, and I said, I would like a book that has these things in it. And then they said, well,
you should write it.
Would you like to do that? And I said, yes, actually, I would. And I hadn't thought about it until that point, but I was developing all of these materials, all of these PowerPoints, thinking about what I wished I would have. And so that was really the thing that prompted me to think about that and start thinking in that direction.
Well, that's very exciting. So you were already teaching in this area. You had a lot of these things developed. Who out there would find this book really exciting to teach with? Which faculty out there who are listening should think about adopting this book, and for which courses?
So I think definitely for international business transactions courses. So that's sort of the obvious course. You might also have comparative business law courses, a transnational commercial law course, an international economic law course, and you could have those at either a JD or an LLM level. Now, I actually think that this could also work in other contexts beyond law school, for undergraduate, for law schools in other countries where they use English language, that kind of thing. But I think the heart is really those people who are interested in teaching the international business transactions classes. And usually folks in that area have expertise in one or a couple of the areas, but not in all of them. And so sometimes textbooks focus on an area. This textbook is intended, in a modular way to really cover all of the different kinds of aspects, whether that's cases, treaties, transactional documents, but also problem sets and the other things, so that if you have expertise in one area of law, international trade or international IP, or whatever area of law you have expertise in, this allows you to teach that area, but also to give the students access to the other areas because of the robust materials. So each of the documents in the issues and explanations section comes with a summary, so both the faculty and the students know. There are additional readings at the end of the chapters that do not have a summary in the textbook, but do have summaries in the teacher's materials for the expanded materials. And in the teacher's material, there's learning objectives for each chapter. And each chapter covers sort of one subject area in the international business context. And it ranges from both core issues that we think of like international trade to other issues that we might think of like human rights or the environment and how those are integrated in, but each of those with their own chapter to look at separately. And also in the teacher's manual, cross-references to where those substantive issues arise in other chapters so that the teacher could integrate those sections. So it's really intended for, in my opinion, either those who would like to step into this space and they're a bit of a novice in this area, but this can position them to teach the class well, or they're an expert in an area, but they don't have expertise in the other areas, so it allows them to teach that consistently across the board.
Well, that sounds like a really broad audience for the book, which is really impressive. And I know you had your JD from Berkeley, but you also have a master's in international policy studies from Stanford. And so I wonder, in the book, is there an opportunity for policy exploration? Is that a focus of the book for the students who are studying this material?
Yes, absolutely. And one of the ways that you see that fleshed out, because of course they might not identify it immediately in the work, is in the teacher's manual, I have tiered Socratic questions so that one can help the students identify those policy issues hypothetically hypotheticals that ask them the question, should we move this policy in this direction? Should it apply to these other things? So that faculty can help the students to see the underlying policy issues that influence the law and integrate that into their teaching. And those are both in the overview of a section of the book. There's the learning outcomes. There's a summary of the content that's in there, but there are also then questions, Socratic questions and hypotheticals integrated into that sort of preparatory overview of the chapter. It's not quite a script, but it definitely gives you an overview of how you could walk through it. And there are accompanying PowerPoint slides for each chapter, as well as accompanying slides for each country, so that the faculty can easily integrate a country in, and it will discuss what resources they have, what services they export, who their trading partners are. And I have that for, I think, 77 countries in the book.
So 77?
Every country that's mentioned in the book is in an index, and then there is a 2-set PowerPoint slide for each country with their resource, services, export information, and trading partners.
That's extraordinary.
Wow. And yes, so I had always wanted that, because I know that the students aren't going to come in with the knowledge of every country and what their current trading exports are, and et cetera. So that really allows people to gain access to those issues in the book.
So as far as the book goes, this is just extraordinary, really. The 77 countries and all of the cases and the issues and examples, global developments, and the additional resources that you have. I'm wondering if we can pull it out to, you were going to say one other thing? Yeah.
If I could just speak to the cases.
Yeah.
One of the things that was really important to me was to have as comprehensive inclusion of higher court cases that I could have. And so I think that many, or hopefully even most people, will see the cases that they are used to teaching, that they are familiar to teaching in the US, and it's pretty comprehensive in terms of the cases in these different areas. So the idea is also that the students can be up to date on what the case law is, up to the date of close to before publication, and really have a sense of the law. And also, a lot of the materials used in the book come from US government sources and other sources that are not necessarily a fee-based source. And part of the reason for this is to teach the students that there are multiple places that they can access resources, but in their first go round, the places that they are learning about in the book to access information about laws in the US and other countries that govern international business are ones that they can look for later. And so the book includes what those sources are right in the table of contents and at the beginning of the source, so that the students can really in real time start to use the materials in the way one would in practice if the faculty member so chooses, or they can live in just the world created by the casebook as its own world.
I was intrigued by the Global Legal Monitor, which I was not familiar with that resource before. And so I'm just wondering, in the context of writing the book and it being very contemporary because you just published it, what were some of those issues that you saw internationally that you think our students, as they go out into practice, will be struggling with or facing in the near term?
Wow, there are so many.
Okay, pick your favorites.
So one of my favorites is an area that we don't see that often. Not everyone is in that area of practice, and that would be banking. So as we see international money laundering, fraud, other issues, banking is an area where students often don't think about that when they're in law school. But that's actually a meaningful and important area of legal practice for transactional attorneys. So it could be whole practice areas like that. It could be practice areas that we're familiar with and that students currently are very excited about, like the environment. So environment is a cross-cutting issue. It can affect all different kinds of transactions. It depends on the regulations in that country. It depends on the international law. So environmental issues will continue to be important issues because they are important at the global level, and people are talking about that. They could be involved in ways of thinking about how a company that they work for, if they're in-house or if they work for a law firm that's advising a company, about how those sales of goods can actually occur. What are the rules that accompany that? What kind of paperwork? And it's small things, even like I say small. Each of these things is a big thing. But if we think about the International Apostolic Convention, and we think about just affirming that a document is actually that document in a manner that that document can go to another country, that's something that could affect a lot of students in their practice, even if where they practice or the type of practice doesn't involve a lot of international law. There are so many ways that they might have knowledge in practice from this class where where they could at least start to think about the issue, know where to start to look things up, know what kind of category to look at. Those are a couple of my favorites. I do have to say that labor laws are an area where I think students are very interested in human rights. I think that for those who work for companies that do international trade, of course, dispute resolution will matter. I think a unique aspect of the textbook is some focus on the customs laws and regulations. I think that's a very interesting area. And so for students who are working, advising any companies who are engaging in import-export, understanding the customs laws and regulations of the United States is a very important start to doing that kind of work well. And an interesting thing I would identify is, for example, in some countries, you are required to report if you think that the client is engaging in a transaction that is not within the bounds of the law. There are countries that if you are working there as a lawyer, you are required to report that. That's part of your reporting requirements, and not in other countries. And so those kind of things will help them as well so that they can meet their ethical obligations in different jurisdictions.
It's fascinating. So I thought you might mention tariffs.
So tariffs are a fantastic tool to lower the cost for consumers of goods. The book definitely addresses that. It doesn't really have a separate tariff section because the tariffs are integrated into how does the international trading system work. They arise in the sections on dispute resolution, international organizations, how does the WTO work, how do companies make agreements in that. Students learn interesting things about the international trading system in that it's essentially a no-fault system, meaning there's not really sort of a punishment option, that you can just get permission to retaliate yourself with tariffs. And so it does give students the opportunity to learn about something that's very important and talked about in our country right now and be knowledgeable in that space.
If you have, well, you must have many students who come to you and say, I want to work in international business. Nevada is close geographically to Mexico, of course, and as Texas is. So we also have people who will be doing international, transnational work. What advice would you give to students, or do you give to students who want to do this work after they graduate?
I give them the advice that they may or may not do this as the first thing they do. So if they are in a location, I was at Berkeley where international law is a major specialty and interviewers go there. If they're not in a location where the interviews go, I would say first build your professional reputation. That is the most important thing you can take with you. Then I would say network, because if you talk to people, you will learn about opportunities that exist and they will learn about you, and they may at some point have an opportunity and say, oh, send them a thing to interview, right? Or, put that information out there. Or I met someone interesting. Let's also see if we can interview them. And you may get advice from people if they're networking. They can get advice from people on how they got into the job they're in. I would say attend panels by people who are working in the job you're working in. I know here in the city that I live in Las Vegas, I know that firms advise clients all over the world, especially the large law firms that are part of other firms. But I've had students who originally came from another jurisdiction in Eastern Europe, and when they became a partner at a firm, that was one of the places they were doing international business licenses. And so they had a mix of immigration and business practice. And so that then served them well because they already had some of that experience. So depending upon how much international experience they already have will often influence how likely they are to do that very, very early in their career. But if they start looking and talking to people, they can find out. And actually, most of the international organizations and agencies, if they start to look, they will see that there are internship opportunities. They're harder to get if you're a U.S. citizen, but there are internship opportunities, and those are things that they can gain access to. They can also look for externship opportunities during law school where there's employers whose practice includes that, even if it's not their sole practice. So I think that there are a lot of ways to get into that space once you start realizing how large that space is, how many aspects of what we do it touches.
So let's look at it another way. You indicated that International, Transnational, and Comparative Business Transactions, first edition through Aspen, would be a book that would help those faculty members who already have some expertise, but also novice faculty members. So I wonder if you can share what your advice would be to faculty members who are thinking of exploring this field as an opportunity for their further teaching and scholarship interests.
I think that it is a really exciting space to teach in because you can go in so many many different directions just from the format, right? You could actually, and for a period of time I did this and I found it very helpful as a new faculty member. I found videos that talked about the evolution, for example, of the global economic order. And I used that in my class so that the students had a shared knowledge with me about the development. So they weren't relying solely on me for that information. And if it's in the reading, it's a little bit different than if it's in the video. So the video is like a complement to the reading work that you're doing. I think secondly, if I might tout the textbook, one of the nice things about this is it tells faculty a lot of different areas. And so faculty could make a choice about whether or not they cover a lot of areas or whether they pick 3 to 7. And they say, I'm going to work in this space first. There's a lot of things I could cover. I'll mention that to the students, but our emphasis will be on these 3 to 5, 5 to 7 things. And that way that faculty member could develop a level of expertise that they feel comfortable with, for example, over the summer and move ahead. Now, in reality, we know that sometimes early in our careers, we're a few classes ahead of the students. This casebook is intended to be helpful in that space by including proposed learning outcomes from which the faculty could select. You don't have to take all of them. Summaries of the materials that are in there, so it makes it easier for the faculty member to make a choice about what materials they want to use. Suggested Socratic questions that are tiered into more complex levels, as well as more questions and answers that can be used both in class or for exam questions and hypotheticals. A rich bank of those for the faculty member to choose from. I think that helps a lot. It's always easier to edit and refine, right, than to sort of create the first version. Having PowerPoint slides ready for each chapter. This casebook does that for you. There's a set of PowerPoints that parallels the content of each chapter. Having model answers, right, or sample answers to things you may or may not agree, but at least it takes you in a direction of these might be topics that could be covered, and you could be preparing for that and thinking about that. And I think that the way that this is structured, it should allow, and I will be teaching with it in the spring, I should note. So it's, came out this September 15th. I am very excited to be teaching with it this spring and going forward. And I think that, and for me, I'm teaching with my book the first time. And so as I think about that, I think that for faculty members who are using this book the first time, the key thing is to read through that chapter before you go through it and read through the materials that go with it. I'm hopeful that they will be quite prepared. But if you're doing it generally, I would say also reading things that are not in your content set. So you just read a few other things. You've got a different picture of it, right? That's not that preset. But I'm hopeful that this will be a case book that is easy to use for faculty teaching in this area for the first time, or even switching over from other textbooks. And we know that that is often a hurdle for people because you have to develop so many new materials. I hope that the materials provided will help people to make that move if they so choose.
Well, it sounds like you really have just a wealth of resources in this book for the faculty and the students, and the unique experiential approach is certainly going to be helpful for both students and faculty. So congratulations again on publication of International, Transnational, and Comparative Business Transactions, first edition. I'm glad Aspen's rep talked you into taking this on. It certainly sounds like it will enrich the field. Before we conclude, I would love to ask you, in your decades of teaching in the academy, you've seen a lot of changes, but I wonder if in the coming decade, what you anticipate the evolution of legal education is likely to include.
So it's always hard to predict, of course. I hope that it continues and expands the inclusion of international law related issues. I think that is a continuing and growing field for lawyers and U.S. lawyers as well. So I'd like to see that. And I think that's likely, especially with the sort of heightened discussions of international issues where students see that these days, where they get their information. I think that it's going to be a time of reconsidering and revising. Where do we set the priorities? How do we do so? I don't know if that will come from, the ABA level or the school levels, but I think that in recent decades, law schools and faculty have identified a lot of ways or areas where we could improve, adjust, adapt, revise to new visions of law school. I think that happens every so often, and this seems like a time period where it could happen again because people are starting, having those conversations. I could imagine increasing numbers of people in law school people who are, first-time family members in college or the law, and that will change the profession because they won't come in with the same assumptions. And so we'll have different conversations, and I think that is shaping how law schools respond to the students. And I think for faculty, I think that the ways that faculty interact with people actively practicing law, with other disciplines, I think that is really growing and refining. And I think to all of our benefit that the legal profession is having those conversations with others, and that is influencing what we write, what we think about, what we teach. And I think that maybe we're even discovering new constituencies that we should be, or however you want to describe it, demographics that we should talk about in law school that maybe haven't gotten as much of our time in law school in the past. And that's everything from being a government lawyer to how we regulate public benefit and of course, to all of the international issues. And all of those things are always shifting and growing over time as the global community develops.
Well, hearing you talk about practicing and teaching international and comparative law is inspiring. It's infectious, actually. Congratulations on the publication of International, Transnational, and Comparative Business Transactions first edition through Aspen. It's been a pleasure to have you as a guest, Professor Anderson from William S. Boyd School of Law at UNLV. And if you enjoyed this conversation, as well as other podcasts with legal education thought leaders, you can hear them on YouTube or your favorite podcast channel. Thank you.